good morning, good afternoon, folks. My name is Frank Jaskulke. I'm your VP of Intelligence at the Medical Alley Association, and I really appreciate you taking a little bit of time out of your day to join us in this conversation. This is a series of conversations we've started this year with entrepreneurs and investors to get their perspective on the world and to give you an opportunity to ask your peers about their journey and their experience, and all of us then to learn a little bit more quickly from each other. I'm joined in this event by a couple of our great supporters of the Medical Alley Starts program, and here's what we're going to do today. I'm going to ask the sponsors to say a couple of words. They help make our work possible. We really appreciate their support and appreciate you supporting them in return. We're then going to go into the interview, the conversation, and during that, you can ask questions. I'd encourage you to use the Q&A function, not the chat function. It makes it easier to manage. Just plop your question in there. I'll be monitoring that, and I'll incorporate them in the discussion as it kind of naturally flows. And so with that, we'll get started. And I think I'll first ask Paul Carlson from CLA if he'd introduce himself and a little bit about CLA. Paul, if you would.
Thank you, Frank. As Frank mentioned, my name is Paul Carlson, and I am a manager at CLA in our life science practice. CLA is a professional services firm, and we exist to create opportunities for our clients, our people, and our communities. And we do that through industry-focused assurance, tax, consulting, and wealth advisory practices. And with more than 7,400 people across 120 US locations, we have the experience to help companies across the entire continuum of care, from early stage startup companies through commercialization. And we pride ourselves on assisting the entrepreneurs, business owners, and other members of the company to help evaluate the financial needs, help reduce financial and task risks, and preserve capital so that the business owners can help grow and envision and achieve the future for them and their company. So we're very excited to sponsor this program, and I look forward to hearing today's discussion.
Paul, thank you. We really appreciate the support. Good financial management matters, especially in a startup where you're managing that cash burn. And if you have that capital, you then need somewhere to put it. And our next sponsor, Mike Giedel from JP Morgan, offers maybe one of the best platforms for that. Mike, if you would.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you, Frank. I am Mike Giedel. I lead our commercial bank in the life sciences and healthcare space across the Midwest and Canadian region for JP Morgan. JP Morgan Chase is a full service financial institution, and we work with not only individuals, but also small organizations all the way up through large publicly traded investment bank types of organizations. Within my group, our focus is specifically on life science and healthcare organizations from early seed stage startup, which is why we are a partner of Medical Alley Starts, all the way through small cap types of organizations. So bringing expertise around financial management for these cash burning companies as they go through their FDA clinical processes to get to a commercialized product. And we can help them at all areas of their life cycle, from helping to place capital, helping to raise capital, a place to put your dollars once they've been raised, all the way through managing credit opportunities, managing international opportunities, and managing investment banking opportunities as the company moves towards a liquidity event. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you, Mike. We really appreciate it. And you might spend some of that money needing IT services. I think with so many of us working from home, working remotely, and working with very sensitive data, you want to make sure you do that right. And one of the best is joining us today, Joshua Davis, with a couple of gurus, if you would.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. So I'm Joshua Davis. I'm the business development guru at a couple of gurus. We are an IT managed services company. We specialize in helping world-changing organizations. We're really serious about making an impact in the world and making a difference. And that's why we love partnering with Medical Alley Starts, because the startup community is a bunch of businesses that are trying to make an impact on the world, and we really want to support that. And to also help the startup community, in partnership with Medical Alley Starts, we are offering free technology roadmap and planning services. So just to learn more about that, go ahead and go to our website, which is acoupleofgurus.com/starts, where you can learn more about that, the program that we have, where we're offering, again, to anybody within Medical Alley Starts for technology planning and things, especially when it comes to like compliance in your early stages. You want to make sure that you're, looking forward to the future and being all set up there. So thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you. We so appreciate it. And now for the main attraction, if you will, or the star of the show. I'm so pleased that we're going to be having this conversation. I'm joined by Rosina Samadani, the CEO of Oculogica, which is a pretty darn unique company working in an area that I think many of us have followed, even if just in the mass press, for a number of years, but applying novel technology to make a big problem easier to diagnose and then thus easier to manage. And so I think I want to start with just saying thank you for spending a little bit of time with us. And maybe, Rosina, could you tell us, what is Oculogica up to?
So Frank, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. We're also really excited to be a part of Medical Alley. This is our first year with the organization. You've already been helpful to us, as you know. So what we have been up to, and I don't know how much people know about us, we're a neurodiagnostic company. Our first indication is in concussion. We use eye tracking as our platform, and we've got a number of indications that we're going after. We do have 4 FDA clearances for concussion in the last 3 years. That is the most of any medical device company without a pre-injury baseline required. And that's pretty revolutionary. And revolutionary is an overused word. Disruptive is an overused word in all startups. But it's pretty different to not require a baseline before injury. You're just able to go in, take a 4-minute test. It's non-invasive, and get an assessment of not only if you have a concussion, but what type of concussion it is.
That's pretty darn interesting, pretty darn amazing to have the 4 clearances already. I want to talk about you in a minute, but something you said, eye tracking. Mm-hmm. So from eye movement, you can get the concussion diagnosis. Could you give maybe a quick brief on what's the science, or how does that work?
Yeah. So the technology was discovered or invented by a neurosurgeon, actually my sister, Dr. Rosina Samadani, who is located in the Minneapolis area. And what she was doing back in 2011 was looking for an outcome measure for patients with different cranial nerve palsies. And she was able to correlate eye movements with specific cranial nerve palsies. And she would do a much better job at explaining this than I am doing. She knows, because she is a neurosurgeon, that cranial nerve palsies are implicated in people who have concussion and actually other things as well. And that your cranial nerves are very important in assessing your function. And so that's where this all is founded. That's where it all started. She then went on to look at normal people with concussion, to bear out and see if her hypothesis was correct. Can she tell the difference between these people just with a non-invasive, simple eye movement test? And those are the bases for our algorithms.
Oh, that's very cool, seriously cool, and very useful. And I'll remind folks, if you have questions anytime through it, you do not have to wait. You don't have to be good Minnesotans and wait till you're called on. Throw them in the Q&A function and I'll pop them up. Before we come back to the company, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you ended up on this entrepreneurial journey? I had seen you've had a couple of startups in your career.
Yes. So I have a PhD in biomedical engineering. I've always been interested in the intersection between engineering and healthcare. That's just something that's a part of my DNA. I started out my career at McKinsey, obviously in the healthcare practice, served a large number of large companies on a range of things, all the way from R&D through commercialization. The great thing about consulting is that you get to see a lot of different problems, and they're typically very important problems for the business. The tough thing about consulting is that you don't get to see it through. After you give your advice, you don't get to see, okay, so then, how did that work out? And I was very interested in doing that. And so went off, started my own consulting firm, in which we were, quite practical. And it was actually a bunch of ex-McKinsey people that went out and, came and worked for me. I then started another couple of healthcare technology firms. My sister was, on the verge of this discovery. I was talking with her a lot about it. The board started looking for a CEO. I was helping them in that search. And because, I knew quite a few people in the industry. And then the board and I came together and said, okay, it's a good idea for you to lead this company, Rosina.
Oh, very cool. And, we work with a lot of scientists who have an innovation or are interested in making that transition from researcher to business. It sounds like the consulting work helped in that, but might you have any advice or commentary for other scientists who are thinking of making that transition? Like, what can you bring over from the scientific work? What did you have to maybe change in your thinking?
So the timing of things and the types of end products that you're focused on are very different. What was challenging, I think, particularly for my sister, was that what the FDA is looking for is not necessarily what you're looking for in a publication. It's quite different, quite specific. And that learning can be challenging for scientists. I would actually say that the real scientist in our company is the founder. It's my sister. I've got quite a bit of business experience, and my scientific background was way back in my PhD years and years ago. And so I had made that transition already. She is a scientist, and she's very interested in a number of different ways that this technology can go. We need to make sure that it's got a business application, and that we're meeting the criteria for an FDA clearance. What is the pathway for that clearance? What is the product market fit? Is there a real need? There usually is. But what exactly is that need? What's the clinical utility going to be? How is it going to fit into the clinical pathway? And then is there reimbursement? What is the reimbursement pathway? Because it's not just about getting the FDA clearance. It's about getting this technology paid for as well. And in addition to that, you really want to have some sort of therapeutic sequela that is happening, especially if you're obviously developing a diagnostic. So it's a different mindset. It's a challenging mindset. It can be just as challenging as the scientific challenges that you face. You need smart people on both sides.
Well said, and completely agree. We had a question from the audience where they were asking about you mentioned the 4 clearances. They were wondering what the indications were.
Yeah, so the indication, we went out and we went for the tough one, aid in diagnosis of concussion. I remember when we first went after that, we were actually advised, don't do that. There is no predicate. It's going to take a really long time. It's going to be very tough. There's no clinical reference standard. That's the one we wanted. That's what we got. We're really obviously proud of that. You can probably hear that. We don't shy away from the really tough, tough things. This is what patients need. They need a clearance that is an aid in diagnosis of concussion, not nystagmus, not some of the other things that were out there before us. And so that is in our label. And I would encourage anybody that does look at this field to read the labels of the FDA cleared products. They're different, and it's quite important, the difference.
I would completely echo that. The example I always use is the Apple Watch and its indication in heart monitoring. If you read the label, one of the things it says is not to use it while standing or moving in any fashion. And that makes sense given what it's doing, but the general population that might be buying the product, that's not how they're thinking about it, and they're not getting then the benefit that they thought. So I totally agree with you that going for the hard thing matters because that's right for patients. And as patients, checking out the labels of some of those products can be quite handy.
Yeah.
There's another question. Oh, please.
And physicians and healthcare practitioners as well. There's a lot of marketing noise out there. And we are very much led by the science, not by the marketing noise. I truly believe that that's not going to hurt us in the end, that we shall persevere. But there's quite a bit of interesting stuff that's being said in the concussion space. And, we are really careful to make sure that our label and our clinical validation absolutely drives our marketing rather than the other way around.
I mean, it sounds like you're building the company, you and your team are building the company for the long run, not for some quick hit and then be done with it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're trying to do this, and we are doing this in a really careful, measured way, one step at a time. We want to bring true, real value to patients. We want to change the way that concussion is diagnosed. We want to change the way in which concussed patients receive treatment. Concussion is actually not just one thing. It is 5 or 6 different subtypes, and it's often a cocktail mixture of those subtypes. Getting people to the appropriate therapy is what's going to change things in this field. And we are very much a part of that story.
Indeed. And a couple more questions that have come in from the audience. Sure. They're wondering about primary market, current status of reimbursement, and then someone's asking if you can talk about it, where you might find Oculogica products in use today.
Sure. So the interesting thing about the primary market for concussion is that it's being seen by a lot of people. And there are, it really depends on, are you in an acute phase or are you in a persistent phase? So in the acute phase, people are going to their sports medicine, orthopedic surgeon clinic, emergency room, urgent care more and more. That hasn't been traditionally a place that people have gone, and even neurology clinics. And then in the persistent arena, it's generally the neurologist that's seeing that, some orthopedic surgeons, some sports medicine. So some of the people that are seeing in the acute setting, they're also seeing in the persistent. Even the emergency room is seeing in the persistent case. So it's a complex patient flow. We understand it very well. It can be very confusing for the patient, and the patient enters the system quite differently depending on their level of knowledge and the people that they have around them, the setting of care, the setting in which their injury occurred. And so, that's I guess the answer to your first part of your question. On the second part, so where iBox is, we're in about 1/3 of the US at this time. We're definitely in Minneapolis, and we're going to be going into a couple of more places in Minnesota. We're going to be making that announcement in the next couple of weeks. So I don't want to steal the thunder from that. But currently in Minnesota, the best location is the Minneapolis Clinic of Neurology. That is the largest, I believe, neurology clinic in the United States. And we're really proud to have them as a partner. So I hope that you don't get a concussion, but if you do, that's where you can go.
I've long been a fan of saying, I hope no one gets sick, but if you do, get sick here, because you'll usually find someone who knows a good bit about it.
Yeah.
Something you just said, I think will be really relevant to a lot of the companies. You talked about the multiple places that patients might enter. You've recently gone commercial with the product approvals, or relatively recently, let's say. What's it been like shifting from a pre-commercial to a commercial stage company and having to now build out that organization and that approach to business.
It's definitely a different mindset. We are a group of engineers. We have been driven by obviously the science, and that's really interesting to us. That's sort of the DNA of our company has really been in engineering, and frankly, our engineers are rock stars. We're really lucky to have a phenomenal engineering team. I don't even know if they're on the call. I hope they are. They're fantastic. We've been blessed with a phenomenal team. Shifting that mindset to a commercial one has actually been very welcomed by the engineering team and by me. We're excited about getting this in the hands of clinicians, getting the feedback back, seeing how our product does. And we're energized to be successful there. We want to do it carefully. Medical devices are not iPhones. They don't launch and everybody buys them and it's a big hoopla, and it's a sort of like a fast adoption curve. That's not what happens in medical devices. You proceed carefully, you proceed slowly, you make sure that reimbursement is in place, you make sure the device is working in the way that you envisioned it would, that it's fitting into the clinical pathway. There's lots of things that you need to figure out as you launch. And then when you pick up steam and you figured that model out, that's when you throw fuel on the fire. And that's when you can have that hockey stick takeoff. And that's what we're building towards.
I'll remind folks, if you have questions, keep them coming in. We had a good bunch at the beginning, so keep them coming.
And no questions. Nobody wants to ask me just anything.
Seriously, folks, here's your chance. An entrepreneur who is and has been going through this journey. Keep them coming. Oh, here's one. The fun question they're asking you to speculate if the iPhone form factor or the form factor of a cell phone, might that be a viable future candidate for concussion diagnosis given the eye track?
Yeah. So I have never heard that question before. We've never been asked. No, we're asked all the time. We think about this all the time. It's there's a lot of things to think about when it comes to getting a diagnostic test onto an ubiquitous platform. First of all, you need to make sure that the technology is there to deliver the diagnostic result that you would like. And the technology to date has not been there. We use high frequency infrared eye tracking. That hasn't been available on the iPhone. That doesn't mean that you can't do other things to compensate for that, or that it won't get there, or that there's aren't some actually even computational things that you could do. But that's definitely something that you need to deal with in order to get it onto that platform. And then the second part of this is that when you basically putting a diagnostic tool in the hands of a consumer is very different than putting a diagnostic tool in the hands of a physician. And if you think about when 23andMe went out there and gave a genetic test out to the public, the FDA had real issues with that. And it wasn't just that, maybe some things weren't validated and they hadn't, they hadn't done all of their work. Maybe they had, but giving that information to patients without a geneticist and without a healthcare practitioner there to explain and give the context is something that you really need to think careful about, you want to take responsibility for as a medical device company. So that's how we think about that market and that opportunity and that form factor.
Indeed, and I think that answers then one of the other questions that had come in about consumer market or potential consumer markets for the product.
We're asked that all the time. It's something that we absolutely think about a great deal. I guess actually our future plans are probably not something I would be talking about in this forum anyway. But those are some of the things, some of the considerations.
Right on. And I'm curious, as you've made that transition from pre-commercial to commercial, we get asked by a lot of entrepreneurs, like, where do you go for insight? Where do you go for help? Where did you go, or who did you turn to get perspective as you made that transition?
So one thing that I would recommend to any entrepreneur, even before they go through the development process, and Frank, I think I've talked about this with you before, is the Lean Launchpad kind of exercise. Steve Blank, I think, was one of the pioneers of this, and the NIH has adopted it wholeheartedly with open arms through their I-Corps program. Our team went through the NIH I-Corps program. It's available to any company that's received an STTR and maybe even an SBIR. I would highly recommend that. Do that as early as possible. Understand your product market fit. That is going to help you with your commercialization. That's going to lay out the go-to-market strategy for you.
Yeah, right. And I remember that conversation, and I've heard that from other entrepreneurs that Lean Launchpad, or some cases disciplined entrepreneurship is another one, just provides such a good framework and a good way to like learn in an environment where you're not necessarily burning the company's cash on risky endeavors, although it's all risky.
Yeah. And we've definitely, made some mistakes, and we've learned, and we've gone down a pathway, and then we very quickly retrenched and said, okay, we've got to pivot over here with our commercial strategy. So we haven't been perfect. I think one of the other things is to look and be very critical of yourself and be willing to step away from a strategy if it's not working out. And that's definitely happened to us.
I think we all are challenged with the sunk cost fallacy of, right, if we've committed to something and it's not quite working out, it often feels like it would just be easier to keep pushing.
Yeah.
When most of the time, right, it is better to cut bait and take a new tack. Another question that's come in, and you've alluded a little bit to this, about the differentiation. They're asking, how do you differentiate from the other products that are in the concussion space? I suspect the indications are one part of it.
Yeah. So this is interesting, because if you look at it from a clinical validation, FDA clearance, from scientific facts, the differentiation is very clear. The challenges on the marketing front, the way that everybody is positioning themselves, that's where the message gets lost and that's our challenge, is to better market our differentiation. It's very clear. We don't require a pre-baseline injury. We have non-spatial calibration. That means that the injury itself doesn't compensate for how the test delivers a result. One of our competitors actually thinks that that's a bad thing. They've used that to say that they've got an advantage, which doesn't even make sense. But that's a sort of their marketing spin on things. We've got the broadest label. We're for both pediatrics and for adults. We are also for any source of injury, not just one of our competitors is for sports-related concussion only. Sports-related concussions are only 18% of all concussions. Our label is for everything. I don't talk about our technology as if it's the end-all, be-all. We believe in multimodal assessment of concussion. And I know that, our competitors, some of them are saying, look, this is it. This is all you need. That's not how concussion works. And so if we really think about how concussion is diagnosed by practitioners and we get into what will be helpful to them, that they need a multimodal assessment. You accept that. It's really important to be honest about what your device can do and where it fits in to with respect to the other tools that they're using.
And something I'm realizing we didn't ask about at the beginning or set a baseline, but you mentioned the 18% of the total are sports injuries. And I suspect myself, I thought this, and I bet a lot of people do, that sports is a predominant area of it. How big of a problem is concussion? And Where
Yeah.
does it seem to manifest if sports isn't the 100% like I might have thought it was?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. The line I always say is 100% of the headlines are about concussion are related to sports. 18% of the concussions are related to sports. And that 18% is a CDC number from many years ago. And the number of concussions has actually been increasing, but that's because people have been reporting them more, because people are more aware. People used to just kind of grin and bear it when they had a concussion, even 10 years ago. That I'll throw a couple of numbers out there. And some of these are old. An older number, I think from 10 years ago, is 1.8 to 3.6 million sports-related concussions a year. 2.5 million high school students had reported a concussion in 1 year, and those are mostly sports. 18% of concussions are sports-related. And then there are other numbers about the number of concussions that people have. Like most high school students, if they've had one, they're very likely to have a second or a third. Our estimate that we have done, and you can just take the 1.8, 3.6, and the 18% multiply it out. Our estimate is that it's around 10 million per year of US people that are getting concussions. And that's at least one concussion, one visit.
Wow, that is a very significant public health issue in its own right.
Yeah. I mean, whenever I give a talk and if we were in a room, the first question I ask is, how many of you have had a concussion or know somebody personally who's had a concussion? And the majority of people raise their hand. And so it's like the Kevin Bacon, separated by 7 people. If that many people know it, that it's a bigger problem than, some of these low numbers of like a million. That's just not right.
Right. Yeah. It wouldn't add up.
It wouldn't add up.
One of the questions that's come in, and Eric, I'm going to interpret this question a little bit, but he's wondering about the challenge in the sales of this being a new product, a newer diagnostic space maybe. What are the sorts of challenges that you and your team are seeing in the market and bringing this new product to market, and how are you overcoming them?
The biggest challenge is reimbursement. So the payers are the biggest challenge. And we are working with the payers. United Healthcare has been phenomenal. Some of the others are taking a little bit more time. And we're at the normal place for a medical device company with an absolutely brand new technology. We had to go to the AMA and get a Category 3 code. We were successful in doing that very quickly after we got our FDA clearance. And we are going through the next logical steps in the reimbursement pathway. Those logical steps are getting coverage for your Category 3 and then gathering claims and literature and applying for your Category 1. So we're going through all of that. I would say just watch us. We're leading on every front in this market. We set the standard for the FDA clearance. People are now using us as their predicate. We went out and got a code for the industry, and we're going to do all of the next steps. So that's the biggest challenge, is reimbursement.
It sounds like, and I think this is a big positive, that you are affirmatively choosing the tougher path, but the path that allows you and your team to define the market and, do it the right way, but also on your terms. That should give you a lot of defensibility as the company grows and as the market matures. Is that fair?
It's fair. It's also the most flattering way to portray us. I'm sure that some investors would say, you guys are idiots and you should be, you shouldn't be even going into a market that doesn't have reimbursement. I have definitely heard that. I've heard a lot of different things. That is what we are choosing to do. We do think that it's going to bear fruit. We're also lucky. We've got a platform technology with other indications. There's a lot of richness in the potential of our pipeline. And so, there's more to come from us. And so if we just had this one indication that we were going after, it might be a little bit shaky from a strategy standpoint, but we've got others. So, yeah.
Yeah, right on. I think for the attendees, like that is such a great point that companies can make a decision about what kind of path they're going to pick, and there's always trade-offs in those paths. I've long time, I live in the land of the class 3 PMA devices where that's kind of the norm.
Yeah.
And it definitely is harder, and some investors yet are not fans of that. But if you do that right, you're saying, hey, there's a bigger market opportunity, both clinically and economically, to address.
Yeah. And I completely get that from an investor standpoint. They've got a certain time frame and they need to get a certain return. And, this is, we need to take the steps to de-risk that for the investor. So I completely understand that perspective.
Yeah. I want to actually shift to the fundraising thing in a moment, but one last question that came in from the audience. They're just asking on a practical side for the reimbursement piece. Are you all doing that internally? Are you getting outside help? How did you think about that as a resource within the company?
So we are doing both. We try not to make things harder than they are. So I have a saying that I have said, almost since the beginning of my career of being a manager at McKinsey was, I need a smart high school student to help us out here. We really try to understand what needs to be done, not make things more complicated than they are, and go out and do that. We did that with our category 3. We did get some help for that application. But we heard afterwards that it was basically a textbook presentation to the AMA CPT committee, and a category 3 code is not rocket science to get, right? It does need to be straightforward, but we did see some abysmal presentations during that Congress. I remember them. And so we do our homework, and, we make sure that, that we're going in not very, very knowledgeable, but all of these things are find outable. And so, it's not neurosurgery. It's not rocket science. It's applying for a CPT code. So let's figure out what we need to do. And let's talk with a couple of people that have got experience. We try to do as much as we can ourselves, but we definitely get outside help as well.
Indeed. So shifting now to the fundraising piece of it as we kind of come towards the end of the conversation, no surprise, it's the single most common question we get, the single most common request we get. I'd be curious about the fundraising journey that Oculogica went on, and maybe if you could talk a bit about it at the different stages of the company's development, how those conversations shifted. I imagine it never got easy, but did it ever get easier along the way?
I'll have to go back and listen to some of the recordings and find out if any of your attendees said it was easy. It's not easy. And I'm wondering, is it, frankly, because I'm a woman? Is it tougher for women? I don't know, because I can't do the controlled experiment of morphing myself into a guy and seeing if it's any easier. I think, understanding what the investor is looking for is really key. You need to see it from their perspective. Like, what is the size of their fund? What's their time horizon? An NEA, for example, has so much money that they need to put to work that a company like ours is too small. The market is too small. They're not going to get the multiple that they're looking for. So you need to know your investor, and you need to understand your own market, your timeline. What is your exit? What are you going to achieve with milestones with this next tranche of cash? And then who are the investors that have the risk and appetite to get in at that stage? Ideally, that's the way it works. Obviously, relationships and all of that, help, I am sure. Our fundraising pathway and story was that we started off with a seed round, a tiny seed round. That was actually before I joined the company. I became CEO 2 years after that first seed round, August 1st, 2015. I went out and raised our first large round. It was called a Series Seed B. We did a convertible note. We did a Series A, and we've just done another convertible note. And we will be raising our Series B in the next, I would say, 18 months or so.
Very cool. I appreciate that. And I will share, especially for the listeners, I find it constantly depressing, but it's the kind of stuff we need to work on. There have been controlled studies where all they will do is change the name of the CEO, same company set to same investors. And if the names have a gendered look to them, it changes the response rate very significantly, which is sort of soul crushing that it can sometimes be that.
I'm not surprised to hear that. That's my sense from my personal experience. But yeah, it's just I can't change that, so I just have to deal with it.
Right on. We'd had a question from
on a really good opportunity. If you're not investing in women, you're missing out on great business opportunity. And so I would say just take a look at the business opportunity rather than the gender.
Indeed.
Yeah.
The economics of it suggest it's among the best ways to destroy alpha in an investment fund is ignore half the world. Yeah, never understood it. We'd had a question from the audience asking about resourcing the company, and if I remember right, you're in New York. Mm-hmm. Some of the companies in Minnesota, some in Wisconsin, and maybe even some places elsewhere. How have you thought about where you're finding people, suppliers, other resources, especially I think about, the hybrid and work from home environment that so many companies now are in?
So we've always been virtual. We were virtual pre-COVID. And so in fact, I was interviewed by a podcast that was talking about remote companies and well before COVID. And I talked about all of the tools that we use. So the transition during COVID to everybody working from home was completely seamless for us. And we do very well. We use a lot of tools. Slack, we try to do every call on Zoom so that we're actually face to face. We definitely look at each other at least once a day. We don't worry about where our resources are. Ideally, we'd love to have engineers co-located in the Minneapolis area, but that's not a prerequisite at all for people in the company. So we've got people in New York, North Carolina, California, Minnesota, Wisconsin, New Jersey, and I'm in New York/Connecticut. So yeah, that's just not something that is a concern for us right now. Maybe as we get bigger, it would be a bit of a concern, but for now, we work fairly well. There's some things that can't be replaced by virtual, right? It would be great to be in person. We're trying to get together at least once a year, and we're hoping to do working sessions during that time. We also want to just have fun and get to know each other as human beings that aren't two-dimensional. But so it's worked remarkably well for us.
Very cool. And I appreciate the way you described it, that, yeah, there are pieces of it that work out really well. Some things you can't get out of it, but that's everything, right? If you were always in the office, a trade-off might not be able to access some of the incredible people you've been able to recruit in the 8 different places that the company is.
And it is less expensive. For a startup, we're not paying for a large office space. And during COVID, we had no travel expenses. And so when you're trying to be scrappy, and we are always trying to be scrappy, we try to do more with our cash than anyone, and have it last longer, because it's really served us well to do that. Our first FDA clearance we got with I think it was under $3 million raised. And so that was fantastic. So you can be very, very scrappy if you're virtual.
I mean, okay, kudos to you and the whole team on that, especially knowing, that you all went for a no predicate, do it the right
Yeah, it was a
way
de
type of
novo.
approach. Yeah, that's pretty darn cool.
Yeah.
Maybe the last thing I'll ask you as we come in and wrap up would just be always the question I love to ask, if you went back to the start when you came into the company and you think about what's happened, what would you tell yourself then that you've learned along the way? I don't want to ask what would you change, because you can't, but what would you tell yourself? Hey, here's a lesson to take away for the next couple of years journey you're going on.
The product market fit, just knowing that up front, understanding, thinking more about the end product and where we are going, because it'll keep us away from distractions. Obviously, I know every single mistake that we've made, and I would love to have not made those. I think I will be even smarter next time because I've made those mistakes, and a hiring mistake or a vendor decision, or some sort of a PR firm or something like that, and all of those things, I would love to not do next time, and hopefully I'll be a little bit smarter next time because I know why I made those decisions. So that's sort of the softer learnings, but having that end product in mind, I think it's critical.
Well said, so important. And I think you hit on exactly the reason why we do these. You sharing your experiences and your knowledge with the other entrepreneurs and people who are on the Zoom helps them to learn and to think through as they're doing their work. And folks, to all those who are here, that's what we're trying to do as a community, speed up this dissemination of knowledge that we might all learn from each other, because ultimately it's bring better products to the patients, make sure more people get taken care of. And so, Rosina, I want to say thank you for sharing your perspective, sharing your knowledge and your time, and being a part of the Medical Alley community.
Thank you so much for having us in the Medical Alley community. It's been helpful already, and I'm looking forward to you guys helping us even more.
Indeed, anytime. It is my favorite thing to do. And folks, with that, I'll say thank you for spending a bit of your time with us. If you have colleagues who should know about these things, tell them to reach out. If your startup needs help, or maybe you're an investor or a large company looking for great startups, reach out, put us to work, and help build this community here in Medical Alley and around the world. Until the next AMA, I hope you have a great day, and thank you for being a part of this community. Talk to you later. Bye.